Well, welcome to part two of our conversation with John Halpin, president and executive editor of the Liberal Patriot. In part one, we talked about his background and what a liberal patriot is and what the liberal patriot is. There appeared a piece in the Liberal Patriot by John, I think last month, from which I'm now going to read a little bit. Maybe don't click away, but this is what got our interest at the Giving Review. This is John Halpin. The networks of astroturfed grassroots organizations, think tanks, and other giant campaign organizations on both the left and the right today no longer function as independent bodies developing new ideas, gathering and analyzing neutral facts, brokering compromises, and supporting mutually beneficial Big Tent politics. One more sentence. Rather, the institutions that make up these political networks often converge on the same set of ideas and positions within a commonly accepted and enforced partisan framework that serves the interests of those currently in power or those seeking power. That's the end of my extended quote there. My question to John is, to what degree do these commonly accepted and enforced partisan frameworks reflect philanthropic strategies or interests or the desires of those who give money?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can't, I don't know the minds of the people who are giving the money. What I know is how things changed. And there used to be, at least in theory and mostly in practice, a version of kind of Madisonian pluralism. So, and that would mean, let's take an issue like criminal justice reform that I worked on. And it was all these clean slate efforts, which, it was libertarians and people from the progressive left, religious leaders, policemen, law enforcement, things of that nature, coming together to do something that made sense, which is to make sure that somebody had served their time, is able to move on in life so that they get a clean slate, meaning they can get a job, re-enter society, things of that nature. Classic kind of, multi-ideological, pluralistic approach to achieve something that's good for a lot of people, not a party, right? Any one party. And there are any number of issues like that, and it used to be there were big competing ideologies over economics and things like that. But you would, even then, you could find some common ground on like U.S. national security interest or a variety of different things, even a commitment to free speech and civil rights. And what happened, I think it happened. I don't know. I can't say for certain. Maybe you can tell me better. I think it fundamentally flipped once the Supreme Court passed Citizens United, and I think it was a switch, because prior to that, it's at least a fiction that C3s in particular are nonpartisan, and your lawyers would give you a bunch of business to make sure it was C3 and we weren't doing a party's bidding, all that. As soon as the court basically said that super PACs can't be stopped and you can't stop the flow of money anywhere, the enforcement mechanism on the nonprofit sector in politics went completely away. That's not exactly what Citizens United was about, but it happened at the same time, when it basically became clear that the IRS and the FEC weren't going to enforce like partisan politics on nonprofits anymore. The gloves sort of came off, and it's like, all right, we'll be more openly aligned with what we think is important from a partisan basis, right? And it's not that everything the outside nonprofit world did was always partisan, but it became much more aligned, almost like a Senate office, right? Whereas you used to do things to try and advance your own interest or some common goal. Then it was sort of like, oh, let's make sure the party's okay with this, or the party leader, or has this been run by X person, or things like this. And it didn't happen everywhere, but it definitely took over. And so then what was independent research, analysis, robust discussion became just bland advocacy. The second thing that happened around that time was the explosion of social media, right? So the enforcement mechanism became, you're not on the team, oh, why are they talking about this? Why is this institution doing this? You're not on Team Dem, you're not on Team Trump, you're not on Team Republican, you're not on Team Squad, whatever it is, the mechanisms took off. And then the third thing were political developments that were real. One were the very real issues around police issues with Michael Brown and Freddie Gray and George Floyd later, right? That systemic racism sort of took over all of the left philanthropic world. So then everything that the Democratic Party and any affiliated institutions did had to have some theory of systemic racism, or they weren't going to get funding, right? On the other side, Trump happened. He breaks the Republican Party, and it probably needed to be broken in some cases, but then things became, either you're with Team Trump or you're not. And, so some institutions that used to do really interesting conservative work just sort of flipped over, and my mind started just doing like pro-Trump propaganda, right? So that's what I mean in a convoluted way to answer the question about the quote. It's not like one thing happened, it's that a few things shifted that aligned what was somewhat of an independent nonprofit world with partisan desires nearly all the time. And so that's why you get like a budget group talking about transgender rights or things of that nature. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? But it's like you're all on the team, and if you're not on the team, we'll make sure that you get punished for not being on the team. And that's the nonprofit sector. What's been written about in so many other places is it was even worse in the universities. And this is where the sort of DEI bureaucracy and all of that starts to take school tuitions go off the charts, and lo and behold, there are speech codes everywhere and all sorts of crazy codes of conduct that make no sense. And the one place you're supposed to have a pursuit of liberal-minded discussion of ideas became one of the most closed-minded places around. And it was already like heavily tilted to the left in the university setting for sure. And it became much more partisan. And so then the one final bit that I'll add that help explains this: there's no political competition anymore. I mean, every state is almost a trifecta, on one side or the other. There are, conceivably only 4 real swing states in the 2024 election: Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. You can add in, it's probably larger. Michigan's not a shoe-in. North Carolina, Nevada might be up for grabs, but I mean, that's not a lot of states that we're contesting, right? So everything's on the line, and these two people that most voters don't like, and either one of them could win through a fluke, right? A fluke. It has nothing to do with an agenda or anything else. It's like 40,000 people didn't show up here, 10 over here. And so the heightened belief that everything's on the line in a deeply divided partisan environment, where there are also states where one party or the other, or cities where one part or the other can do whatever they want, has heightened all nonprofit activity towards advancing the partisan goals, either nationally or at the state and local level. That's my sense of it.
By which you mean, this is, I guess, a question, and this is an Inside Baseball sort of site the Giving Review is, the effects of Citizens United were large enough to include both C3s and C4s, regardless of what the specific legal issue of the case was.
I think I watched it happen across the spectrum where and it was really like watching lawyers telling you what to do. They just stopped doing it. And it was like, it'll be okay. No one's going to enforce anything, right? And they don't enforce anything. So, religious groups now are like openly partisan with no threat whatsoever that they're going to have the IRS or anybody else come after them. They probably shouldn't, but that's the tax code, right? That's what makes it. It's tax-free because you're not supposed to engage in partisan politics. When you get rid of that, it's like, well, that's fine. I don't want to restrict your speech, but somebody shouldn't get a big tax break for it if you're going to do partisan activity, right? So I think it's basically people just stopped worrying that anything was going to happen. And then I will say that the nature of advocacy, because of social media and other things, took off where everything became advocacy. It's not just, well, let's have a debate about it anymore. It's just, here's what's right. Here's what you support. These guys are bad. They're evil. And it just became so easy to enforce a dichotomy in us versus them. And I think it just bled over. It's not to say that all groups are like that or all organizations are like that. It's not true. There's still good work going on that's independent, but the incentives for independent work have gone down dramatically. And you've seen, the most high profile sort of deplatformings and things like that at the university level, but you see it quietly in nonprofits too. It's like, oh, we're reviewing your work for the year, and we don't think you added enough here. And what's the basis for it? It's like some senator or some House Freedom Caucus member like crapped in their ear about something that was put out by an organization and they weren't in line. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. I mean, again, it's not just on the left or the right. It's on both, really, And so philanthropists are in a great position because they're not beholden to those parties to say, you know what, we're not going to fund groups that do this just partisan activity. We wouldn't mind bringing them together to find some actual solution on immigration or crime or, the war in Ukraine, whatever it is. And instead, they're kind of lined up along quasi-partisan lines,
Yeah.
and
Blame,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
blame can be assessed there, right? Why are they so blame can be
Blame.
assessed? I want, feel free to criticize.
Yeah, I think Trump drove everyone mad on the left. I will say this. I think Trump is a symptom of something that was happening. There's going to be some populist break. It had already happened on the left with Occupy and Sanders and things like that. It was coming on the right. I think it surprised people how quickly he got Republicans to disavow most of their economic orthodoxy and a variety of different positions and things like that. But it really made people on the left nuts. And, and I think that Trump's presence and his presidency led people to just think, all right, all the gloves are off. We're in some kind of existential battle against fascism and racism, and we do whatever we want, right? And conversely, I mean, you listen to the Truth Social and Trump, right? I mean, they're nuts. Like you hear them talk about their opponents like they're vermin that need to be exterminated. It's just so weird, and it's illiberal and in many ways, right?
Trump caused some unsettling on the right too, as I know you're aware.
But that's what I was getting at. Yeah.
That's over.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. This is a version of the same question. Based on the calendar, Citizens United was 2010, far before Trump. Trump was not a product of any conservative, philanthropically funded intellectual infrastructure. He was kind of hence the unsettling, I guess. But that's withered away now. Or?
No. Trump came in the middle of it. It was happening anyway, right? And he just accelerated it because he's that kind of figure, right? I mean, he's this Rorschach test of whatever, It's so easy to make these quasi existential battles over a guy like Trump, right? Yeah. But it was happening prior to that, and I mentioned, the genuine issues around police mistreatment of Black Americans is real, but then it turned into this elaborate code of systemic racism and equity and all these ideas that at their root are kind of illiberal. I mean, it's not egalitarian civil rights anymore. It's, well, we can discriminate against some other people to achieve some higher social justice goal we want. And that, in my mind, is kind of a nutty idea. It's a bad idea, but it's also bad politics, right? But this had already started before Trump, right? Trump comes in on a platform that's very hard on immigration. Oddly, he didn't talk a whole lot about race. I mean, except that his stuff on Obama, it was mostly an immigration thing, which, regardless of his rhetoric, there was a problem at the southern border, right? So he then, of course, took it to a different plane, and I think his opponents also then decided that it's like the singularity has arrived, and we have to put all battles into this singular battle against fascism and racism, and social media exacerbates it, and cable news and things like that. And if you stop and stand back from it all, it's insane, and it's not American. And people of different stripes don't go after each other like this on a normal basis. It's not a humane way to deal with each other, and it's not an American way to deal with that. We have big differences, but we usually fight them in pretty decent ways, and now it's just easy to have, almost like teenager-y like reactions to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like how that person talks about this, and we hate them now. And sometimes you think, like, why are we involved in politics? It's such a dumb field, right? It's so important to human existence, but the level of debates we have now are just, I don't know. There's such lowest common denominator. We have another year of fighting Trump and Biden. Like, what good is that going to do the country, right? And all of the nonprofits are going to line up behind that battle, Trump and Biden. It's all on the line. America's going to end or be saved in 2024, and we have to talk about this for an entire another year because we have an insane political structure. And so what I'd like to see from the philanthropists, the people who give money to this, is like, don't give into this. I mean, don't believe that you have to like fuel this battle. You can fuel a different set of discussions that are less partisan. Partisanship's not going to go away, and people have their passions and their factions, but where you can almost like force Rawls's veil of ignorance on people. Imagine you're not a Democrat or a Republican or a Trump person or a Biden person. What would you want to see that's done for the country that's good? You know, I'm using the veil of ignorance as a metaphor here.
So, okay,
there's a lot you could come up with. There's a lot you could come up with if you did that. Say, you don't know which party you're in. You want it to be to the benefit of everybody. What should it look like? And, you know, the philanthropists can fund those discussions. And eventually maybe party leaders on both sides start to emerge who are like, you know, we're sick of having these other fights. We want to have different, more constructive efforts.
So might that answer, those people who are interested in that answer to the problem, be helped if, or by the way, even if they're not, would it be a good idea for policy to intervene to either make it easier or to prevent the partisan politicization of, I really mean here now C3 money, the tax subsidy, tax incentivized usage for particular candidates. And, you know, to say to philanthropy, of course, you know, stop is one thing, but should that be said by a policy maker?
I mean, I think if you really could, the problem with the decline in trust in institutions, that all institutions are either controlled by one party or the other at any given time, is that it's hard to do things like that because it will be seen as somebody trying to intervene to stop criticism or actions against them, right? And that's a legitimate concern. But you could at least enforce the rules and have enough people to enforce them to say, this is not C3 work anymore. You're doing the active work of a party or a candidate. You know, you've lost your tax exempt status, you know, and it would have to be uniform. It's hard to imagine, given the state of politics today, you could get a perceived neutral body to do this. So I wouldn't recommend that as a solution because it's not likely to work. It might inflame things. But I think if you're the one who's taking advantage of these through your philanthropic giving, you could just demand higher standards. Like, we're not going to give to groups that are, you know, quasi-partisan and pretend to be something else in a funding proposal, right? I mean, we want to fund groups, you know, broadly within our ideology or across our ideology or without an ideology to do either specific interest-based work, which is like Madisonian pluralism, advance things for poor people. Like, it doesn't matter, like wherever you can do it. If it's with Republicans, if it's with Democrats, state, you know, that's something you could do, not advance the Democrats' anti-poverty agenda at all times, right? So I think you could do it, but the left-wing foundations are kind of the nuttiest promoters of this stuff. So you can't submit a grant without saying, what are you going to do on DEI? You know, give us your statement on systemic racism. And if your statement is, I think this is overblown and illiberal, and you can't defend it, and we want to have a policy that's actually egalitarian and based in civil rights law, they'll be like, all right, no thanks, we're not funding you, you know. And you know, on the right, I'm not sure exactly anymore. I mean, I don't know. I mean, most of the stuff like you used to do at Bradley, I mean, that was all sort of ideologically based. It was like towards a vision about free enterprise and like civil society and religion and, you know, like things that are American. And so part of it might just be going back to things that we were doing in 2000, right? I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel entirely here. Sometimes it's just remembering that things weren't all that different not that long ago. I mean, or actually we're quite different, and is what I meant to say, is that in the 1990s, we had fierce political battles, but we also didn't have the kind of craziness we have now. And Bill Clinton was able to win a bunch of states that are completely off the table, you know, for Democrats now. Republicans and Democrats got together, even if they were fighting, but there was at least stuff done. And now, I mean, there is stuff done. I mean, to Biden's credit, they did pass some. It wasn't with huge bipartisan margins, so people don't think it's truly bipartisan. That's the problem here. It was like a handful of Republican senators who were good, right? And you know, the one thing that was truly bipartisan in some cases was some of the Trump Pelosi pandemic aid. You had a lot of people coming in on that stuff, but that was kind of a separate end, you know, it was a separate thing. It's not going to be replicated again. But it would strike me that on immigration, crime, defense, Ukraine, family policy, things that strengthen families and make it more affordable to raise a family. You really could find some common ground on this if you just, again, use like, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican advancing Democrat and Republican policies at all times. I'm doing things that are good for the country and its people. So people will probably say that's naive, like, oh, that's not the way power works or money. But I am reluctant to recommend harsh federal government interventions on things, because there are speech elements here. I mean, I don't think it's, one of the beauties of the philanthropic sector is that, people are free to fund things that they think are important and ideas that they think are important, and should be able to say that. I just think it makes more sense for them to remain independent rather than to align themselves so much with any given leader or party at any time. Because there's also a practical side of this. The two political parties, or the two major candidates for president, their ratings are in the toilets. Nobody likes them, right? So I don't know why you would align your philanthropic efforts with things that have such bad images, but that's just me. So.
Great. Well, John, why don't we end it there after I thank you for doing this with us? Totally appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. It's great. Yeah.